Jin. I'll be there for you. Cassian said I had to.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now a galaxy far, far away, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
Last week, we gave people the chance to listen to our panel from Comic-Con. And we've gotten a lot of really good messages about that one, about the topic of conversation, which was creating stories with mental health in mind. I thought you would like to know. We've received a couple of emails and some really great tweets. And someone on Patreon said that they wanted to thank you for the insights into how to write for characters, keeping mental health in mind, making sure that it's represented properly in creative fiction and storytelling. And so I thought you would like to know that.
That's super nice. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks for folks who have written us and connected with us about that episode. I recently was a guest on another podcast, which hopefully will be posted soon, and then I'll give the information about that. But the host is another psychologist who...
Oh, that's got to be dangerous.
No, it was super fun. Fun. But he said to me, he really was asking me why we're doing the show and why we go to panels and why we talk about psychology in these more public forums. And I had a hard time returning to the justification. We've been doing this for so long that it took me a moment to I mean, my gut reaction was, why not? Isn't this what we should all be doing? And then I realized, and he was incredibly complimentary and curious and very willing to understand this kind of path. He took a very different path. And he has a YouTube channel talking about psychology. So he's also out there sharing psychological science and clinical psychology and counseling psychology into the world. But his message was one that reminded me that this kind of work can still be seen as a little bit like outside the... I don't know, outside of, we're still drawing outside the lines a bit. Yeah.
We're still not in the what would be considered the norm of psychological science and relaying that information and all that. You're still playing somewhere on the outskirts.
Well, he kindly offered me advice and said, why don't you teach this in classes, and why don't you maybe create some kind of children's program for schools? And I think those are great ideas.
And you've kind of done that sort of thing. Like you've taught a little bit in college courses. You've also created curriculums for children, not specifically for this kind of thing, but like for your work with Pop Culture Hero Coalition,
right?
So you've kind of been dabbling in those things already. So did you feel the desire to take his advice and do a little bit more of this, like in a classroom type scenario?
No, I was very receptive to his recommendation around it. And certainly, again, he was very kind about it. He said, this could be a way to get your voice out there, but also to impact young people who may be able to learn psychological science through pop culture and fictional storytelling. And I completely agree with that. But I didn't necessarily immediately feel that call to action.
Well, there's a significant difference between getting together with people that you know and like and love and simply having conversations where you get to sort of disseminate the psychological science, and then there's stepping into a classroom situation where you're now teaching and you're giving tests and you're can you imagine what a test would look like in a situation like
yes,
this?
I could.
Where you're like
I could.
All right.
But I think that the least appealing aspect is the packaging of this. Not that I'm at all, let me just say, I don't find myself to be an artist or to say that this is more of a creative dialogue type space that can't be bound by a curricula. But that standardization that you're referring to is what makes me not want to do it, because I'm walking away from a field of gatekeeping, standardization, hierarchy, elitism, the ivory tower. And I sort of feel like that's unnecessary when what we're really talking about is the health and well-being of all of our communities.
Yeah.
And none of those barriers and boundaries need to exist for this information to be shared, whether you're a young person, a child, or an adult. Now, most people who listen to this show are, I think, adults. So this is kind of where we fit. This is where we belong.
Yeah. And I'm happy here. I'm glad that you're happy here and that you're not looking at packaging up the Arkham sessions and taking it to some university somewhere where I wouldn't be able to participate.
Well, you could.
Like, do they let like co-hosts, co-teachers in a class? Like, are there classes taught by two people in college courses?
Of course,
college psychological courses?
Yes, you're a subject matter expert.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about some of that subject matter. This week we're covering Rogue One, which is our final installment before jumping into the original trilogy that started it all.
A New Hope. The next movie will be Star Wars: A New Hope.
Yeah.
Can I not call it Star Wars: A New Hope?
You call it whatever you want. You can call it whatever you want. I'm not gatekeeping. I don't gatekeep. I have never
You're making a face.
I have never been able to choke A New Hope down. Like I to me it's Star Wars. It's always been Star Wars. And again, that goes back to like when I watched the movie originally with those original prints.
Sure.
It was pre A New Hope.
Sure. So for you, it's like Star Wars.
And I think it just sounds like it's a stupid title for a movie, A New Hope.
So for you, it's Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Star Wars. Then, it would be Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. But really, it's just Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. Because we know it's all part of that. But you remember the logo had Star Wars in it, and then like Empire Strikes Back was there in the center, and Star Wars was in it, and Return of the Jedi was there. But like when I remember Star Wars, it was just that yellow Star Wars font and all that, and then Episode 4, New Hope. I couldn't.
If I can align with
but you
this,
can call it whatever you want.
I don't like the episode numbers.
Yeah.
But it's a way to have common language, because once you have the 3 trilogies,
but if I said to you,
things get complicated. That's
interesting. So if I said to you, if you and I are talking and you're like, oh, which of the 9 movies is your favorite movie in the Skywalker saga? And I said Star Wars, you'd be like, but which one? Like you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know which one I was talking about if I simply said Star Wars.
I guess coming from you, I would know.
I would think from most people, if you said what was your favorite Star Wars movie,
you think,
and someone goes Star Wars is my favorite, you wouldn't automatically go, that person must be talking about Episode 4.
No,
A New Hope.
I will tell you that in the sphere of people who've seen some of the films, all of the films, one of the films, you'd be surprised how few people in that kind of big circle would really just refer to Episode 4 as Star Wars. I mean,
few people
and interestingly, outside of that circle, when you say Star Wars, of course, most people think multiple movies. When I hear people who've never seen a Star Wars say, "Oh, I've never seen Star Wars," they mean the whole thing. They mean they've not seen a single movie out of the collection, and they collectively, like, they lump them all in as Star Wars, and I think that's fair.
Sure. Yes. I would, and this is all semantics. I would say people would. I have heard people say, "I have never seen a Star Wars movie," and we all understand that they mean none of them.
Yeah.
But if someone says, "I've never seen Star Wars," they might mean the entire, or they might mean the first movie.
They mostly mean the entire.
Yeah, possibly.
Okay,
yeah, I mean, okay, but I don't have a problem with that. But it's weird for someone to come at me and be contrarian when, if someone said, "What's your favorite movie?" and I say Star Wars, the movie came out in theaters as Star Wars.
Yeah.
So this isn't like a James Bond movie or a Harry Potter movie. That movie was what it was. And up until the prequel series, no one would have ever questioned.
Oh my gosh, now I'm
the
laughing
use of
to
the
myself.
term Star Wars.
It's as if someone, if you ask, like, what's your favorite James Bond movie, and they say James Bond.
They wouldn't, because none of them are called James Bond. But Star Wars was called Star Wars.
All right, so let's talk about Rogue One.
Okay, we'll talk about Rogue One.
Which isn't even in the
it's not even in the Skywalker saga, but it is part of it is significantly more so than, say, Solo.
Sure.
It is far more connected to the events of those 9 episodes, right? Like this is a side story that informs us as to how Princess Leia Organa gets the plans to the Death Star that she then feeds into the memory banks of R2-D2, just as she sends a message out to apparently her old friend, General Kenobi, and jettisons the droids out into space above Tatooine, where R2-D2 is found by Luke Skywalker.
This is a small story about a group of small but mighty heroes. These are the resistance fighters and revolutionaries who end up getting the Death Star plans to the Alliance, period.
Yeah.
It's a very tight story.
It is a tight story. It meanders a lot. The pacing is weird on this movie, but yes, it's a very focused story. I want to ask you, Drea, because it is so different from the rest of the movies, because this is a soldier story, right? Like this, when they first announced this movie, I thought we were going to basically get the Star Wars version of the Dirty Dozen.
Which is what, for people who don't know?
So the Dirty Dozen is a classic World War II movie where a group of prisoners who are sort of considered roguish and they don't take orders well. They are whipped into shape to go and perform this one mission that's really kind of considered a suicide mission. Like, it's sort of where you think of like the Suicide Squad came from. It's a pack of...
It's like a task force.
Yeah, it's a pack of prisoners who are ne'er-do-wells, who probably shouldn't get along, but finally end up as family, and now they're going to go succeed, and spoiler alert, they don't all make it. Like, it's just sort of... And you feel bad for them because you're like, I love that character. They were so rough around the edges, but really they were good people, you know. And so I thought that's what we were going to get, and it's kind of what they tried to give us. Unfortunately, I think the plot of Rogue One starts to supersede the character development of Rogue One. We don't really get much from these characters that we're supposed to fall in love with the exception of Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones. Captain Andor, right? Diego Luna, who's now getting his own series on Disney Plus.
Which I am absolutely celebrating. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. And really, no one else. No one else in the group. I mean, I guess the closest you would get is maybe K2SO is like the next character with personality in terms of the heroes. In terms of the villains, obviously you have what's his name? Ben Mendelsohn's character, the
director.
Krennic. Yes,
Krennic.
Yes, you've got Director Krennic,
or as Vader says, director.
Director,
and then in the same sentence says director. It's weird.
Well, sometimes you want to stress things differently, I suppose, for certain people. But you get a little bit from Krennic, right? Like we understand his plight. His plight is that he's got an ego that needs stroking. He has basically been the creative mind behind the Death Star, the concept of the Death Star. Mm-hmm. He has overseen it from the plans all the way up to a fully working, capable machine of mass destruction. But he's just not being given the credit, and he's not being praised enough for his efforts. He's probably not the guy who is the smartest engineer, right? Like the head of the engineers is Galen Erso. And we know that he is the father of our hero Jin, but Galen is the one who is sort of overseeing the engineers who are making the dream come to life with metal. Like they're the ones actually building the whole thing and designing the whole thing. But it's really the brainchild of Krennic, and you do kind of feel for him only in the degree of a character. We've all been in this position, right? Where your bosses start to take credit for things that you did or completely take over projects that now you should be overseeing because you built. I'm sure you've been in situations like that, Drea, and various career sort of jobs that you've gone to from place to place. But I know I've certainly been in that position. Suddenly your name doesn't come up when the big boss is saying, "Hey, thank you, Jimmy Joe, for your efforts and your team's efforts," and they just completely forget that you're the one who built it. Did you hear my voice crack there a little bit?
Yeah.
As
I hope Jimmy Joe is not their real name.
Jimmy Joe's not their real name.
Okay.
But we do understand that character. But really, this movie is about following two people, I think. It's Jyn Erso and it's Andor.
Yeah.
Who do you want to tackle first in your
Probably Jyn Erso,
okay,
for a number of reasons. I think she is the hero, or she's the heroic figure we're meant to follow. This is Jyn Erso's story. And generally speaking, from a very broad sense, mm-hmm, I'd say that seeing this film again after, I think it had been a couple of years since I'd seen it, mm-hmm, it's a satisfying film. It's not perfect. I agree with you. I think the story and the message kind of, and the need to drive home that this is about the plans, the Death Star plans, getting to Princess Leia. Mm-hmm. I think that gets in front of some of the character movement and the development, but it still holds up. It's still a heartfelt story. And I think it's got some moments that keep you attentive and engaged and speak to you. That may just be me. I don't know. I know actually a lot of people who say Rogue One is one of their favorite Star Wars movies because of its elements, because of what it makes them, how it makes them feel.
I certainly appreciate the movie a lot because it's treated like a war movie and not like a fantasy adventure, a space fantasy. This isn't Flash Gordon Instead, it's,
Yeah.
again, like I said, the Dirty Dozen in space. I think for me, I just would have liked to have seen more of a plan. Like the beauty of the Dirty Dozen and a story like that, and there are lots of stories along these lines. And you look at like the Bridge over the River Kwai, and just any number of military movies. There is a specific mission, and we are going to do that mission. This movie takes a while to get to that mission, and then when the mission is finally revealed, it turns into a third act climactic battle. And certain things sort of fall apart. Character decisions and logic making sort of fall apart in order to make this a tragic ending. And I don't mind a tragic ending. Look, one of my all-time favorite movies is The Wild Bunch. Like I like me a good tragic ending, but at the same time, I start to question some of the choices of some of these characters. That being said, I think you're right. I think there are great moments within this movie. There are really good. I think back to some of the speeches given in this movie, it probably has some of the better speeches in the Star Wars franchise.
These are the quotes to live by.
Right.
If you want a good Star Wars quote, look up Rogue One. We'll probably play a few.
Yeah.
But as you talk, I think certainly this is, and you're right to some degree. It's almost like you have some archetypes here. And we'll get into them maybe in more detail. But someone's got to be a Jyn Erso, somebody who's a bit hesitant, not fully in the resistance movement. You've got to have a Captain Andor who's been fully in and lived the life of a resistance fighter, knows nothing else. You've got Saw Gerrera, who's an extremist in a fringe faction of the Rebel Alliance. So even within kind of the Alliance spectrum, you have these characters that represent different psychologies of what it's like to be in what it's like to be anti-imperialist is not one beat.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate about this movie, because I think it speaks to a lot of us where we're at and where we're trying to be.
Talk about that. Talk about that's a really great way of putting it, Drea. Talk about those different factions and what it means to be anti-imperialist but not necessarily be on the same page. In the case of Jyn Erso, she's not even necessarily anti-imperialist. She says she keeps her eyes down.
She's like there's a ton of tension and frustration that you feel in the first half of this movie about Jyn Erso. So she's like, when we meet her, she's, I don't know, 10 years old. She's a young kid on the farm, and it's about that time that director Krennic comes to retrieve her father, Galen Erso, to get back to working on that Death Star. So Galen Erso is the science officer. He's the subject matter expert. Yeah, he's going to be the one who can finish these plans, and the Empire, i.e. the government, comes to retrieve this government worker
who doesn't want to be retrieved.
Absolutely does not want to be there.
He now understands what this means.
Yes. So father has made a moral choice. There are some flashbacks where we see Jyn Erso as a much smaller child in the city with her father when he was actively working for the government. So we know that she's been old enough to understand that he worked for the government. And sometime later, they find this moisture farm. It's not a moisture farm. It's like it's even worse than a moisture farm. Wouldn't you say?
Well, it just appears to be a bunch of like pebbles. It's sort of like...
It's kind of like what you think a moisture farm would be.
I don't know if they're actually farming. I'm not entirely sure what they're doing.
It's a very
over there.
dark, it's a dark, misty,
it's like a black sands
wet planet.
It's like a black sands beach kind of. We also are introduced to new toys. I mean, black soldiers, the sort of black stormtroopers. They're the ones who have been designed to be the elite.
They have those voice changers.
The elite force, and I don't entirely know why you need them to come get this farm guy.
It's intimidating.
It
Krennic
is intimidating.
lands with his flowing white cape.
Well, it's like you said, why did they land so far away?
I have no idea.
I said, look, the further away you land, the scarier you can be as you just get closer and closer and closer.
So they land on this planet, and there's like 3 or 4 football fields that they walk
and
in their
uphill
boots
as well. Like they gotta go
to the farm.
Yeah,
they get there, and the family knows it's Jyn, it's her father, her mother.
Yeah,
who they've got the plan down. Mom is Lyra, so Lyra and Galen tell Jyn, this is it. You know, you go hide in the hole that we've set for you.
Go hide in the hole.
And
hey, the hole's pretty great though. It's a big rock.
It's awesome.
It's a big disguise. Like I even told you, like we need to get one of those. It's just a big rock that you lift up, and there's like a little submarine type door, you know, with the twisty turny. You open it, lift it up, get in, and it's pretty sweet.
That's the plan. So that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, Lyra doesn't make it.
Well, Lyra comes back. Like Lyra decides to come back with a pistol.
She's had enough. This has been years of her husband working for the Empire. She's feeling completely helpless. She now has what was considered somewhat of a safe place to raise her child. They come and retrieve him. She's just about done with this. So unfortunately, she's killed. Galen is taken, somewhat unwillingly, but he knows he must cooperate. So you have some elements.
He's doing it to protect his daughter.
Right. So you have some elements here of some moral distress, but survivalism. So he goes with the Empire. And Jyn Erso is retrieved by Saw Gerrera. And Saw is a very well-known political figure in the Alliance. I think it's notable here because I've always wondered, the Alliance, technically the Alliance to Restore the Republic, the Rebel Alliance, this is not a political group. This is, so it's not as if like in our politics you vote for such and such, and then you can vote for somebody who's representing the Alliance. Like, no, this is a fairly well organized coalition of dissidents. So these are revolutionaries, dissidents, political, anti-imperialist systems. This is a resistance movement. So while they're organized, they're not yet officially in the political system, is what I'm trying to say.
Correct.
Everything you do in the Alliance is an act of resistance.
Yeah.
And Saw is seen and known as this somewhat extremist member of the Alliance. He represents,
and we could call him what he is. I mean, he's a terrorist.
I'm getting there.
He's all blowing up. Like
he's
you say,
using
extremist,
bombs, right?
But he's a terrorist.
He's using assassinations, bombs. You know, really violent forms of disruption. And we later kind of learn that he is, I don't know, disowned or not accepted
disavowed,
by the other political leaders of the Alliance, Mon Mothma.
Yes.
And
because you've got senators within, or you've got people who are genuinely trying to change things from the inside, while also underground they are leading the resistance. Yes.
So you have that, and then you have this guy kind of creating extremist factions and making choices that can interrupt their movement.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's some things that he does that they simply morally do not agree with.
Yes.
Right. And we'll kind of get back to that. But he rescues her as part of the plan. We learn later that he raises her for another few years until she's an older teen. And at some point, she sees it as abandonment, which I wouldn't necessarily argue against. But he separates from her. He kind of leaves her at a conflict or before a conflict to save her, because his claim is that people will learn that she's the daughter of this imperial scientist, and that she could be a victim. She could be targeted because of that. And so at some point he separates from her. And when we meet
now,
her...
is it to protect her, or do you think it's also to protect
I
his
think,
own movement? Because if they're coming after her and she's linked to them, eventually they're going to find him.
Yeah.
And
I think it's both and.
Yeah.
Maybe he sees in her this capable fighter, someone
which
who...
he says that
Yeah.
she was the best fighter he had. And she says, I was 17 or something. Like
yes.
she was,
And I wonder if I know you have this interaction. I wonder if you can play that, because even though we're jumping around, when Jin eventually sees Saw in person, when they go to find him to retrieve him now, he shares with her his justification for why he left her.
Yeah.
But he also makes a very challenging comment, because his assumption is, look, I've not seen you either. Like, hey, you've not really been in this movement. And so explain to me how it's okay for you to look up and see these imperial flags. How do you get through that, knowing that these oppressors are ruling us?
okay. So let me actually play the audio and then we can talk about it.
Jen, is it really you? I can't believe it.
Must be quite a surprise.
Are we not still friends?
The last time I saw you, you gave me a knife and loaded blaster and told me to wait in a bunker till daylight.
I knew you were safe.
You left me behind.
You were already the best soldier in my cadre.
I was 16!
I was protecting you.
You dumped me!
You were the daughter of an Imperial science officer. People were starting to figure that out. People who wanted to use you as a hostage. Not a day goes by that I don't think of you.
The Alliance, the rebels, whatever it is you're calling yourself these days. All it's ever brought me is pain.
You can stand to see the Imperial flag reign across the galaxy.
It's not a problem if you don't look up.
And this is one of those moments I do appreciate about this film, that you can feel empathy for Saw Gerrera, not agree with what he's doing, but feel a little bit of understanding for his methods, his sense of completely like being all in. And you also, I think from Jyn Erso, I don't know, I sort of felt that gut punch. And that is framing who she is, at least for me. She goes through a period of time where she can simply say, if I don't look up, this doesn't really affect me.
Yeah.
And it's powerful because you get the sense that, at least for some period of her life when she was out of this resistance movement, she could kind of experience her life in a privileged bubble.
And that's what I was going to say, because she reminds me very much of any number of people, particularly in the United States, who just don't pay attention to the world outside of these borders, where and maybe even outside their own state. It's like you have no idea what's going on in your own country. You have no idea what's going on in the world around you. And so there are so many people who have no idea what's going on in, say, Ukraine. And even more so in other countries that have not made the 6 o'clock news every single night for weeks upon weeks. But, it's like, as long as I don't pay attention,
I'm not affected.
I'm not affected. And that is absolutely privilege. That is absolutely, well, you don't have to be affected because you have chosen not to be involved. As opposed to these other people who are absolutely affected and did not have the choice to be involved. This is that reluctant hero, right? The person who refuses the call.
Now, my question for you is, did the writing of Jyn Erso, because I know a lot of people don't like Jyn Erso. I'm not sure why I like her as a character, but do you think do you
use punctuation there? You're not sure why you like her, or you're not sure why.
Well, let me ask
character.
you the question. Do you think that they took her a little too far? They made her a little bit too privileged or a little bit too self-centered and protected and in her bubble. That did that impact your ability to like her? Because we see her change a little bit, but did this make us kind of not feel connected to her?
I didn't really have a problem with her. I mean, I know a lot of people take real issue with the spunky woman character who's just wily and dismissive and all that. I'm not someone who has that issue with a lot of those types of characters. She is someone who, within context, like if you're just judging her based on a trailer, which, by the way, half her dialogue in the trailer isn't even in the movie. There were 5 weeks of reshoots on this movie. 5 weeks. I mean, that's an entire feature film in some cases. But you know, if she's got a quippy line like, "This is rebellion, isn't it? I rebel," then you could be like, "Oh, I hate her." But when you think about
based on that,
but when you think about it in the context of, this is a girl who does feel like she was abandoned by both father figures she ever had, was trained to fight. Ultimately, was basically sort of trained as this child soldier. And we've talked about that before. Mm-hmm. And then by the person who trained her, she was left again. And she also believes that her father is in the Imperial, on the Imperial side. She has no reason to have love for her father, whom she hasn't seen in many, many years, until she sees the hologram that was sent to Saw Gerrera. And he leaves this very heartfelt message to her, I guess because he either assumes that she is still with Saw and has never had been abandoned. So, and in his case, he thought Saw Gerrera had just like raised her this entire time. Mm-hmm. And as long as she's still alive, of course she's going to see this message. But, she just happened to come upon Saw Gerrera just around the time that he got this message. So it's a good thing you're here. And then we see the message, and this is the beginning of that arc, right? Like, she had no desire to help the resistance. She sees this message. She now understands what her father has been doing all this time. She understands the assignment. She joins the plot to go get him and to go destroy this Death Star. So I saw a character with an arc. Yeah. I saw a character who was on mission. I think maybe the problem is I see a character who's just constantly on mission. But I don't have a problem with her. Did you liked her character?
I did. I think in watching it again made me appreciate that maybe you're supposed to be frustrated with her in these moments where she makes these statements. And there's another time where she makes kind of another frustrating statement. She says to Captain Andor, "I've never had the luxury of political opinions," which is something else that kind of I stood up in my chair, like how can you exist without having this? And then I realized as we get to know her character a little bit, some of what's behind the comment is
her past.
I could understand her psychology as someone who's been somewhat, wrung through, dragged through the political system. And it's true for her
on
to
both
say,
sides.
yes, the Imperials, taking advantage of her family, killing her mother, taking her father, treating them as objects, as tools, as weapons. And for her to say, I've never had the luxury of a political opinion, actually has that second meaning. It's not so much, I don't have to worry about this. It's I never had a choice.
Well, and on the other side of it, she has also been in the lifestyle of the extremists. She has seen the awful things they've done
with Saw,
and they abandon her, right? So she at this point, I think she's just reached that point of nihilism, right? Nothing matters. There's nothing I can do as an individual to change this. Both sides are wrong and both sides are doing awful things. And by the way, that's the reality of war, right? And I can't speak as a soldier. My father is in the military, but I have never experienced that. That's my privilege. I have never had to experience that life or death situation personally. I've never had to go to war. I've known lots of people who have, but I have not had to experience those things. So I cannot speak from any of the soldiers' perspectives in this film or in any film, but I can speak just from the humanistic side of, I firmly believe that there are people on both sides that are horrible people. I firmly believe there are people on both sides who are innocent people fighting for the same things, just on different sides of the battlefield. And I think that there are people who are thrust into these positions where they feel like they are trying to defend something. They're trying to fight for something. And they believe they are on the right side of this war. In the case of Andor, he actually has, I think, a great speech that I've got here, and I want to play it for you. But just to set it up, well, I'm not even going to set it up because I think he kind of does that here anyway. This is right after the council has basically decided not to believe her when she says that the Death Star has a weakness. We have to go get the plans. We have to go form a plan around the plans that we get. We have to go figure out how to take this down. My father has sabotaged the Death Star. And so she is sort of on her way out, I guess, to go live her nihilistic life, knowing full well that she was right, but is just a lowly cog in the system and is unable to make change. And suddenly Andor shows up with 20 other people behind him. And this is what he says.
Would like to volunteer. Some of us, most of us, we've all done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion. Spies, saboteurs, assassins. Everything I did for the rebellion. And every time I walked away from something I wanted to forget, I told myself it was for a cause that I believed in. A cause that was worth it. Without that, we're lost. Everything we've done would have been for nothing. I couldn't face myself if I gave up now. None of us could.
So this is my point, right? You've got a character who has now said this, who is now openly acknowledged. There are some of us in this war who are not necessarily good people anymore. We're not necessarily, we have done horrible things in the name of the resistance. We are the people who need to believe that what we are doing, whether it's good or bad morally, is going to be worth something in the new future. Like it is important to know that if I go assassinate somebody, or if I go spy on somebody and bring back this information, or I go do any of these just horrible things, that in the end, it will make the universe better. And so I think this says a whole lot about this particular character. And he also acknowledges earlier on in the movie, I've got this audio clip too, that he's been doing this since he was a young boy, right? Doesn't he say that he's been in this war since he was like 6?
Right. And this is where, again, I sort of think this film gives us something a bit rich, a bit, gives us something to chew on. It's clear-eyed about what a resistance movement might really look like. Again, with the Saw Gerrera character being this assassin, bomber, terrorist person, and then Jyn Erso being conflicted about any involvement. Mm-hmm. And the Cassian Andor character, I think, is really crucial to Jyn's character arc, but I think too an understanding of what a lot of people feel in the Alliance, which is a sentiment so strong, an idea that for as long as they could remember, they've been fighting these oppressors, that to live, to just exist in this universe is a radical act, that he is the individual and groups of people who are marginalized, oppressed, victimized, disenfranchised, and he's representing that in this film. So for her to look at Jyn Erso in the face and say, this has suddenly become important to you. Yeah. Now this is impacting you personally. And so you're like, rah, rah, fight on, I'm in. That line had to be said. And I think, I stood up and like had my fist up in the theater. Like, this is,
and then everybody behind you just yelled at you.
Sit down. But that feeling that I think can happen within a group of inclusion and exclusion, join us. We this fight is important. We rally to have more and more supporters in the movement, but also a little bit of in-group fighting around, how does this impact you? It impacts me differently. And for him to say, this is the way my life has been, is a very relatable comment. I'm glad that they had that in the movie. It doesn't mean that her joining the Alliance isn't important or doesn't have its own significance for her later, because it does. And by the way, she has a very personal reason to be a part of the Alliance, to sort of reform or undo what her father contributed to. Mm-hmm. And there's some legacy about her father even creating this vulnerability in the Death Star. So it makes her meaningful as a part of this movement. I don't want to take away from that. But that's where these sides kind of come in. It's the both and. What he said is still absolutely true. You've been able to ignore this, and my whole existence relies on this activity, on this activism.
He represents the real world countries in which babies are born with bombs going off nearby. You're talking about any number of places in the Middle East, right? And any number of places that are in territorial disputes or in disputes over resources or religious disputes. There are real cultures that have never known anything that wasn't war, where just the silence would give them PTSD, because they don't understand this lifestyle that Jyn has lived, where she's by herself. She doesn't have the luxury of choosing a political side. She just keeps her head down. She has chosen to ignore those people who have been affected by this war and oppression from the beginning of their lives on,
Yeah, I think too, it also, with Andor representing that voice, involves a hard truth about protesting, about any kind of large movement, social movement, political movement, and that's that there are sacrifices and losses, and there's violence. And I think, if I can bring this to what's going on in our country a little bit, I'm not going to get super political, but I can look to history, and I can look to psychology research that shares that while extremist behaviors, violence in particular, real kind of, destruction, bombing, injury, that sort of thing, some individuals and some groups in reform movements go in that direction. And the inclination is very natural, right? Shouldn't we really disrupt the system? And how can we make this matter? How can we make this visible? And the reality coming from history and research shows that there's actually, this could actually disrupt the movement itself. That someone like Saw Gerrera, for instance, is interrupting the movement. In particular, studies show that you gain less supporters. I'm sorry, you gain fewer supporters. Pardon my grammar. You gain fewer supporters when you use extreme tactics. Right. So, let me use what I think might be a straightforward, somewhat less political example here. So let's just take a fictional group of animal rights protesters. Now, if we learn they break into an animal testing facility and march peacefully, I'm going to get back to the word peacefully, but march, sit, do a sit-in. I think, we can maybe relate to that. We can even praise that. And in fact, more support will go to them than, let's say, people who come in and destroy the facility, even use violence, destruction, fire it, set it on fire, which hopefully wouldn't impact the animals, but that's exactly what this kind of thing is, right? Would that kind of attention-seeking behavior be more effective?
Right.
And it turns out that more moderate types of protesting, that kind of movement, that kind of behavior is more effective in creating long-term sustainability, having more supporters, more folks involved, and hopefully leading to change in the system. And that's where I think we get a lot of this tension with Jyn Erso and Cassian. Andor, in the beginning of the film, Andor straight up just shoots a guy who's in the Alliance because the guy can't escape with him. He can't climb up the thing with him. Yeah. And that's shocking. That's incredibly disturbing. But Andor's psychology is what?
The ends justify the means.
Right.
You have sacrificed yourself in the name of the Alliance. Thank you very much.
So when the social order is being greatly disrupted, when property is destroyed, when there's risk of harm to people, that leads to something called disidentification, or the disidentification effect, where more middle of the road moderate people will be like, whoa, that's not me. I'm not a part of that. I can't connect to that. I won't go that far. And that's where you have sort of this this segmented, fractured part of the movement.
Right.
And as I say that, I also want to share that Andor is also incredibly relatable, because when you're fighting something that is critically and almost undeniably oppressive, by participating in the movement, there's nothing peaceful about that. So let me be more clear, because I know there are listeners who are like, yeah, all you got to do is march in the streets and have sit-ins and, sign petitions, and I say this, when it's your existence that's being debated here.
Yeah.
Any sit-in, any march, any event like that is violent. It becomes radical when you live in a body that is oppressed. And that sentiment is so clear from Andor. And I feel like that comes through.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing that today in many cases. I mean, people talked about the various the various protests over the last few years, and well, why did they have to do this and why did they have to do that, and so I mean, you look back at the 1960s. You look like
you're so right.
You look back at the 19 like when was the last time real change? I mean, geez, let's go back to the Revolutionary War, shall we?
Oh dear.
Did we not all just start boarding ships and throwing things over and making a real ruckus in order to make statements? Did we not,
I like your comment about the 60s, because let's talk about that briefly with some historical examples. Mm-hmm. If you were gay in the 60s, you existing, already the American Psychological Association labeled gay or homosexuality as a mental illness.
Yeah.
You have these police raids at gay bars. You're existing. You're just your ability or freedom to be who you are is challenged in all these different ways. And so there's no peaceful march or sit-in or walkout. You're exposed to violence.
Yeah.
And your fight is the freedom to exist as you are. So I think you're pulling from our history a really helpful
and also
time.
let's look at, I mean, you just said that in some cases no sit-in, no march is considered non-violent. You go back and you look at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, in 1965. You literally have a group of people who are simply crossing the bridge, trying to get to the state capitol to protest, right? And they are met with horses and tear gas and billy clubs, and there's a significant amount of violence that happens. Now, the people who crossed the bridge weren't the ones that started that violence. The ones who crossed the bridge certainly knew there would be violence on the other side, though, right? Like they knew that they didn't have to throw the first fists in order to get onto the national stage. All they needed to do was cross the bridge. But you're right. Like in that case, that is a peaceful protest, a simple march across a bridge that then ends in a horrific incident. And then you've got people like Andor and Jen Erso to some degree who are learning all of this or already know it and now make it part of their lifestyle. When she says something like, and she never says this in the movie because it's part of the reshoots, but when there's the bit in the trailer about it's a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel. They are a rogue faction within this very industrial system of the resistance, right? The resistance is equally political, equally industrial in their way of thinking, and she is genuinely trying to make real change happen by going off and doing these things that are unsanctioned. And in the end, they end up winning, even though several people meet their end to Darth Vader's lightsaber in a hallway, in a corridor. But
yeah, and she doesn't do it alone, which is another.
She does most of it alone.
No, I mean,
Andor.
She can't. I mean, she
Andor's
can't,
there with her.
But she can't get the plans up to the Alliance ships without somebody closing the hole in the what is that? The shield. So there's all these ways in which these other characters, which we should talk about, participate in this important mission. Two of those characters are pretty critical to the mission. The two kind of like brotherly characters, Chirrut and
Baze.
Mm-hmm. So Chirrut is this spiritualist.
Donnie Yen.
Yeah, talk about you recognize him from some films.
Oh, Donnie Yen's a legend. He is. Well, I think it should also be said that his character Chirrut, right, is not an original character by any stretch of the imagination. He is basically playing. If anyone is a lover of cinema, he's very much playing the Zatoichi character, who is a blind masseur who is also a master bladesmith or a bladesman and just a real kick-ass character. God, I think there were over 25 movies made and a TV series with over 100 episodes made of Zatoichi. It's a fantastic character, and that is literally what he is playing in this movie to some degree. But Donnie Yen is a legend in martial arts cinema. I mean, I wouldn't put him in that Bruce Lee category necessarily in terms of household names, but certainly people know the Ip Man franchise. He has done a number of American movies. In fact, he's going to be in the new John Wick.
Really?
Yeah, he is a legend. So it's kind of a big deal to have him play this character in a Star Wars movie. But here's what's unfortunate about this character and really anyone who is not Andor or Jyn Erso in this movie. I brought up on IMDb. IMDb has a really great, if you sort of know where to go find it, you can get a screen time breakdown of these characters, right? So let's take Star Wars. By the way, completely by coincidence here. On IMDb, on their breakdown of characters, it's just listed as Star Wars 1977. It's not Episode 4: A New Hope. It's just Star Wars. Whereas Empire Strikes Back is Star Wars Episode 5: The Empire Strikes Back. Mm-hmm. So like Star Wars is Star Wars,
okay.
according to IMDb. So we go and we look at Star Wars, right? Luke Skywalker has 37 and a half minutes of screen time. Han Solo has 19 and a half minutes of screen time. C-3PO, 19 minutes, 15 seconds. R2-D2, 18 minutes. Obi-Wan Kenobi, 17 minutes and 30 seconds. Princess Leia, 13 minutes and 30 seconds. Chewbacca, 11 minutes. Darth Vader, 9 minutes, 15 seconds. So everyone is getting up there in that, with the exception of Vader, whose every moment is incredibly impactful, everyone is in the double digits of minutes, right? Then you look at Rogue One. Chirrut has 9 minutes of screen time. When you think about the minutes that are spent with him, they're either him simply sitting someplace or actually fighting. Like there's not a whole lot of genuine character building. We understand that he's one of the Guardians of the Whills, which, especially if you've read or heard the Secret History of Star Wars, we know that the Whills was originally going to be what the Force became. And that George Lucas had originally wanted someone similar to the Watcher to be narrating the story as someone filling in the Journal of the Whills, and this is the story of Luke Skywalker and all this stuff. None of that ended up happening, but they are now bringing in those little tidbits from those old notes into the franchise. And so he was one of the Guardians of the Whills. So Chirrut has 9 minutes. Baze has 8 minutes and 15 seconds. K2SO has more screen time than
either of those
them.
two.
Yeah.
And how about Bodhi?
Oh, Bodhi's got 11 minutes and 45
Okay.
seconds. So he's in, but Bodhi is a pretty important, crucial plot point.
Right. Bodhi is a catalyst character,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Bodhi is the Imperial pilot who was given the message by Galen Erso to take to Saw.
Yeah.
He is, once that happens, he's pretty prominent in the rest of this mission. He goes with the team to not Jeddah, Scarif.
Yeah.
To Scarif is beautiful. By the way, if anything, this movie has beautiful landscapes. All the planets are just astounding. And Scarif is just so glorious. And then they, of course, start blowing it up. And by the very end of it, Scarif
It's gone.
is no longer a thing.
It's just gone.
Which
The
is
planet's still there, but yeah.
Well,
yeah, they don't destroy the entire planet.
are
They
you
never,
sure?
Yeah,
Because
no.
the Death Star.
Yeah,
blows it up.
but in the same way that they destroyed, you remember where he was like, well, we don't want to give it a test of destroying the planet. So they ended up blowing up Jeddah.
Yeah.
Right. They do the same thing on Scarif.
Right where
because
they are.
Because they're not allowed to blow up the whole planet, because it's not until Dantooine, or it's not until Alderaan, that the battle station fully destroys.
This is the nerdiest
planet.
conversation
No,
we've ever had. I totally
Grand Moff
agree.
Tarkin says now it's time to give it a full test
You're right.
of its capabilities.
But they don't destroy Scarif, but they really do injure it.
I mean, that whole
This planet is gonna
that
be-
planet's like done.
Which
Ecologically is just done.
Yes, and it's an interesting, not completely explicit statement about war, but you have a lot of destruction to the universe, i.e., planetary.
Yeah, like you don't have to
creatures and
you don't have to
fauna.
send a planet into bazillions of pieces in order to have destroyed it.
And that I think has some intention.
Yeah.
These beautiful landscapes that are then destroyed to pieces, and the destruction is pretty visceral. The destruction is again very clear here. There's a lot of that massive war, injurious kind of impact here. Things will never be the same again for these places, for these people.
Yeah.
And I think that is somewhat intentional. The vulnerability and mortality of the people who fight this mission, in particular, who sacrifice themselves for this mission, but also the overall aftermath.
If you really want to go a step further in talking about colonialism, you could even say that the mere fact that Death Star has entered that planet's orbit is going to completely affect everything about that planet. Just the size of that thing.
It's huge. There's a book called The Death Star that I have somewhere in one of these shelves, and they go through just how massive it is, how many rooms it has, how many people it inhabits. It's really kind of astounding. But anyway, so getting back to some of the characters,
Chirrut and Baze, right?
So Baze is the counterpart friend to Chirrut. They're partners. I'm not sure how to what depth, to what degree they're partners, but he is he's the person who kind of questions and makes fun of Chirrut's spiritualism.
Well, we know that at one point Baze was one of the most steadfast in his beliefs in the wills and the Force and all that stuff, but has become disillusioned by it.
He's turned to physicalism, and his weapon really denotes that. He has this giant, I don't know, this pack. He wears this pack, and that drives that weaponizes his, I don't know, what is that? A machine gun?
Yeah, sure.
Some Star Wars version of that. And he's kind of the power of the team. So Chirrut has his staff.
So you're saying that Chirrut is master and Baze is blaster.
I guess. I don't think that.
He's the brain and
No,
Baze
I
is
mean,
the brawn.
I think they're both brains, but I think
Okay.
they use different. Again, the spiritualism and the physicalism.
Yeah.
They're both kind of using. Although
and then he's
Chirrut-
turned, and then Baze is turned in the end. Although we don't know if it's just out of
Fear.
just out of respect for his fallen comrade.
Yeah.
But he then starts to use the force. I am one with the force is with me mantra as well. I mean, it doesn't last very long.
No. As a duo, they're pretty effective. And by the way, Chirrut, although someone who relies a lot on the faith of the Force, is also physical. He's just as capable and offensive and deadly as Baze is with his gun.
Although, and it's interesting too, because sometimes Baze will end up protecting him
For sure.
and Chirrut believes that the Force did it, but one can't argue that it's very possible that the Force was still acting as his guardian through
yeah.
Baze and all that stuff. So there's this philosophical, like, yes, you may have been the one pulling the trigger, but it was still the Force that protected me.
What I like about these characters, and I agree, they don't have a ton of screen time. You don't really get their
To know them.
backstory. You don't really get to learn more about them. I don't know if you can, but with this kind of movie, but even Bodhi, it's clear when you kind of think about how this ragtag team gets together and how do they effectively do the thing that everyone is telling them they will fail at.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is using what they're good at, turning to their strengths, helping each other. A lot of kind of collectivism here. I like that scene where they land on Scarif and they're told, what each group is supposed to do. You're right. This is a war film,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them know, like, look, you're on the front lines. You got to be on that beach. You're going to be shot at. But going back to Bodhi, his part in this becomes meaningful. He finds his purpose in this mission, and he's charged with one of the most frustrating, but I guess important details of getting the plans to the Alliance, which is connecting that giant rope, that giant hose to the plane in order to go analog.
Yeah.
And that's something that I care a lot about with Star Wars.
Analog.
The analog and digital, the future and the past kind of coming together in like nothing else. So he's got to physically line. He has to have a physical line for the data to get to its proper place. And so, even with K2SO, one of my favorite characters in the whole Star Wars universe.
Probably because it's played by Alan Tudyk.
Alan Tudyk does such a great job. But K2SO is such a straightforward, tell it like it is, matter of fact droid. He's so likable, even though he's kind of mean. He doesn't really mean to be.
Well, he has one ally and everyone else is just sort of there. Like he's sort of the Chewbacca to Andor, but he doesn't like her until he does at the end. Like,
yeah, I think there's some symbology too. He's an Imperial droid who was reprogrammed. And the idea with that is you can be built and designed to be a part of something that's oppressive, and you can change.
Can I ask about the reprogramming? And this also is with the who's the droid in the in Solo? So there's this, like, the reprogramming gives him like this a whole personality, right? He becomes an entirely
it seems like compared to the other Imperial droids,
Right.
he has a wider variety of affect. Like,
Yeah.
it's a droid, so those aren't real
but it's
emotions.
a very human affect, like more so than say C-3PO, who is still very much in a protocol droid, like sounds like a droid, still sounds like a droid to some degree, like does not have the fluctuation in tone and voice that like K2SO or what's her name in Solo had. So yeah, like it almost makes you wonder how much reprogramming could do. Like R2D2 communicates in beeps and whistles, but if I reprogram it, could I just make it speak English because it's or
any
you know,
language.
common, you know, whatever, because it's still just sound coming through a speaker, right? So then you start to backtrack and wonder why certain types of droids are meant to speak in certain other types of, or do other, I don't know. By suddenly giving a character like K2SO such a wide range of human characteristics, I then start to question all the other droids in the Star Wars universe.
Like, why aren't they as dynamic?
Yeah, like why aren't
K2SO?
any of them as dynamic as K2SO?
Because they're not built to be.
They're not played by Alan Tudyk.
Maybe. You know that, what an insult to our good friend, Anthony Daniels, who
OG.
who has put everything into 3PO.
Right. But 3PO still doesn't have as dynamic a range as a character like
I don't know. We'll get to that
K2SO.
because I think there are some later sequel stuff.
Sequel stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean, okay, all right. Maybe. Okay.
And look, there's also the wiping. The data wiping. What is it like for a droid to have multiple data wipes? How might that impact their sustainability?
Oh, because 3PO's data wiped a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
All right.
So here we are at the end of Rogue One. Many of our heroic figures do not make it.
Many.
I think
None.
I mean,
None of our heroic figures
some
make
of the
it.
alliance, some of the leaders in the alliance.
Oh yeah, the ones that didn't go.
Yeah.
Like the ones.
No, but Radis, Admiral, is he an admiral? Admiral,
Yeah.
Colonel Radis.
Yeah.
He's really critical.
I mean,
to this.
none of
He makes
the 3 or 4 that we are following the whole movie make it. Just the people who are around the council.
Yeah.
Just around the lighty up table, you know,
Right.
they make it. Mon Mothma makes it. And then we got some pilots who then join later who don't make it.
All the boots on the ground.
All the boots on the
They're
ground.
gone.
None of them make it.
They're gone, right? So anyone who's landed in Scarif pretty much meets their destiny, meets their finality on Scarif. One of the last scenes between Jyn, Erso, and Andor is them holding hands on the beach as this explosion takes place.
As they just watch this explosion come at them.
Yeah,
there are other
it's-
ships right there in the area, but you know,
It's not
worth
Star
it.
Trek, Brian.
No, it's not worth
You can't
it.
beam them into the ship.
It's not worth it. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to nitpick.
So how did you feel about the ending there? I found it to be, I found it to be breathtaking. I found it to be meaningful and satisfying in that way. There, it was exactly what Andor had said and forecasted. Let's not make all of these sacrifices
Meaningless.
and losses. Yeah, let's make that really mean something.
And as
even
a
if it means
character,
we lose our lives.
And as a character, he was tired of fighting So he just didn't,
Yeah.
because that's, I think, the first time I saw this movie, and even the second time I saw this movie, though what you just said might change my mind. I had a real problem with the two of them just sort of sitting down and letting it happen, because I felt like you've now found your purpose, and because no one is to say that just because they got the plans up to Princess Leia, that everything was going to be meaningful later. Like, these plans things still need to happen in order for this war to come to an end.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like sitting on the beach holding hands watching a nuclear explosion essentially come and like take you away.
Yikes. Wow.
Is the end of your story, unless he is just tired of fighting and believes that this was his purpose.
A little of both. That it's true that I think what you said about his exhaustion and maybe a little bit of activism burnout is leading him to realize his end is here, and an acceptance around, this is where my journey comes to an end. This is where this stops for me.
Plus, I think he's always known since he was 6 that he was going to die probably fighting.
I think he also, I mean, there's another part of this where, there's two things I want to say. One is that he may be at peace with this being his end, because as you said, if he survives, his world, his existence is continued warfare and suffering, and maybe he's ready to be done with that.
That's what I mean, yeah.
I don't think I think someone like him doesn't get to be done, doesn't get to just walk away.
Right.
And that's what he said from the very beginning. So I think this makes sense. The other piece too that doesn't make us overly upset and, disappointed is that with any kind of activism, with any kind of movement, every person has their part. There's a tremendous variety around different roles people take. And that might be his role, and this may be a significant piece of a giant puzzle. And other people, Princess Leia, Mon Mothma, Radis. I feel bad if I'm demoting him, so I'm going to call him Admiral Radis. But these folks have their component. They have an active piece of this giant puzzle. No one person, I mean, if you think about it, there are people that are not even in this film who are doing things toward the movement. What about the counselors and the psychologists? What about the social workers? What about people preparing meals? Whatever you have. There's a lot of different roles and individuals who have their participation in this, and this was his. And I think that he's at peace with that.
Yeah, I agree. Next time we get to talk about Star Wars,
A New Hope.
Yes, we get to talk about both of those movies tomorrow, or not tomorrow. Please, not tomorrow. Next time. So, are you excited? Are you excited to finally be getting to the trilogy that started it all for us?
I'm a little nervous about it.
Why is that?
To be honest, I'm wondering about the psychology of the original.
Oh, you can't wonder about that, because you've had 6 iterations of the psychology of Star Trek versus Star Wars, and you've done very well.
We've had panels about the psychology of Star Wars, but as you know, the other side, the Star Trek side, I felt has more butter.
Well, this first movie is a science fiction fairy tale. I mean, it is a damsel in the castle being held by a dark knight and a evil wizard, and then you got a good wizard and a farm boy and a pirate. You got, like, this is a fairy tale, right?
Yeah.
So, but I still think you're going to be able to pull a significant amount out of the film.
If people want to give me some suggestions, I do have a way to hear from them.
Okay.
It's on SpeakPipe.
Yep.
So just go to SpeakPipe /the Arkham Sessions, press a button, leave me a message. I would love to hear what folks have to say about
Yeah,
original
all these
Star Wars
people,
film.
all these people who are leaving us emails and tweets.
Yeah,
Need to leave us
just leave us a
speak pipes.
voicemail. We want to hear from you.
Yes, speakpipe.com/the Arkham Sessions.
Right.
Perfect. Okay. So that's next time. Drea, until then, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you online?
You can go to my website, drdreapsychology.com, or find me on social media at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028, or you can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions or on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. You can absolutely come to Facebook and join the conversation there, or come to patreon.com and for just $1. You can get these episodes before anyone else. For $3, you can vote on what we cover after this Star Wars franchise. And for $5, you can get your name called out in each and every episode of the Arkham Sessions as we go forward. Plus, there are other cool stuff that you can sign up for. Also, be sure to follow our family over at Fanbase Press. Go check out their news, their comics, their other podcasts. They are absolutely fantastic and well deserving of your listen. And until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel.